And so want to welcome everybody to the April meeting of the Omaha 365 user group. And I just got one announcement, and our May meeting will take place on May 6th. And we're going to be hearing from Sherry Oswald. She's going to be talking about Microsoft Forms. So that will be geared to a lot of users. And so make sure that you announce to your company and anybody in your company that the meeting is going to take place. And it's virtual again, so anybody can attend. So that's the only announcement. We're still looking to fill up the rest of the year. And so if you'd like to speak, go ahead and contact me or Amber, and we'll get you scheduled. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he's out in sunny San Francisco.
All right. Thank you so much, David. Good morning. It's still morning for you guys, as it's morning for me here as well. Just a little bit of an intro. My name is Michael. I work at a Bay Area-based consulting group called Converging Computing. I've actually worked there for 20 years. Over the years, what I've done is I've been in kind of an architect role, so designing things like SharePoint, designing Exchange servers, things like that. And of course, over the past couple of years, that's transitioned to a lot of cloud-based technologies. So within recent years, I've been doing a lot of work within the security space. I've always been involved in security, but now I've been very heavily involved. And so that's really kind of what the focus of this conversation is going to be about. I've been lucky enough to be able to speak around the world. That's actually a Power BI map that you see on that slide of all the different locations that I've spoken at over the years. Haven't had the pleasure of speaking in Omaha in person yet. Maybe at some point in the future, especially once we get out of kind of pandemic mode here and I get back to travel, we'll be able to come over and speak. But in any case, travel's kind of a hobby of mine as well too. I really enjoy traveling, exploring new cultures, new foods, things like that. So in any case, like I said, hope everybody's doing well and we get light at the end of the tunnel and all that. It looks like things are starting to get a little bit better, at least in the States. And then hopefully worldwide, this thing will start to calm down. But I do, like I said, work at CCO. I've also written a few books. You're probably aware of the Unleashed series. I was involved with both SharePoint, Windows, and Exchange Unleashed. Don't do those anymore because honestly, it's not like Microsoft just releases one thing and then it doesn't change, because that's what they used to do. They'd release something in and then it would be 3-4 years before it had actually changed. Now every 2-3 weeks, they're changing their software. So books don't make as much sense as they used to. So what I'm going to do, and just so you understand the way that this is structured, the first half of this conversation, I'm probably going to be scaring you if quite a bit, actually. I'm going to be focusing on the types of threats that your organization and you personally may face. It is a bit scary, and not a lot of people are necessarily aware of how sophisticated the modern hacker has become. The second half of the conversation, I'll be focusing on ways that you can kind of protect yourself. So again, not to just all doom and gloom, that's just the first portion of this. But it used to be that the modern hacker was just kind of the guy in his mom's basement, the script kiddies, or someone who was just interested to see if they could break into something or maybe potentially steal and sell something on the side. That's changed significantly nowadays. We're getting to where we have hackers that are much more sophisticated and have much more resources at their disposal. So they're starting to do very specific types of attacks. The first one I want to focus on is this thing called spearfishing. And you may have heard of a concept called phishing, phishing with a P. Phishing is where someone would send, for example, like an email blast off to a whole bunch of people in the hopes that someone clicks on one of the links or clicks on the payload, and that puts a virus on their machine, or that gets them to give up their credentials. Well, spear phishing is very similar, except it targets a specific person. So what happens is that the hackers will actually go through an organization, and they do reconnaissance against that organization by looking, for example, on LinkedIn, seeing who has profiles there, seeing what their roles are within the organization, and then they send targeted emails specifically at that person. So these targeted emails are much better than the ones in the past where you'd see spelling errors or obvious problems with that. And a lot of times they'll come even from trusted sources. So they target an executive, they target someone within finance, and they try to get them to give up their credentials, or they try to install malware on their machine by getting them to, for example, hey, look at this spreadsheet. Can you look through this numbers? And then there's an infected macro within the spreadsheet. Or please click on this link, and it prompts them for credentials, and they just happily enter in their username and password. So these types of spear phishing attacks are incredibly effective because it's much harder to be able to tell when someone's being spear phished, because you can't just see the blasts of emails and just lock down and say we're not going to accept email from this IP address anymore. It's very specific emails going to very specific people. So spear phishing has become a major issue, and it's a major way in which hackers will. It's a major entry point for hackers to get into your organization. I mentioned the resources that these users have. We're starting to see more and more state-sponsored attacks. So you have different countries that feel that it's in their interest to spend a large amount of money to essentially hire whole groups of people to sit in professional, cubicle farms and to essentially hack organizations all day. They go out, they try to see what they can get. Sometimes it's because they don't like, let's say, a specific industry. There's the famous case of the Sony Pictures hack, which is where a specific government decided that they didn't like the way that they were portrayed in a movie, and so they essentially leveled the IT organization of Sony Pictures. And so that was, of course, state-sponsored. They definitely went after that particular organization. But in some cases, they're just going after to try to essentially just raise funds, either through ransomware, which we'll talk about, or simply by stealing IP and then reselling it, or using it for state industries, stealing IP and then giving it for other industries that they have within their particular state. So we see state-sponsored attacks as being an issue that comes up a lot. Ransomware is a concept in which someone gains write access to files somewhere, and what they do is they then encrypt all of those files and essentially throw away the key, or put the key aside and say the only way that you'll get this decryption key is if you pay up in cryptocurrency, if you pay up in something like Bitcoin or Monero or some other type of cryptocurrency. These actually are incredibly effective because, if you think about the front door in which people come in, they spearfish somebody. Maybe that person is an IT admin, and they gain control of their system. At that point, then they look out and they say, okay, what does this person have access to? They see all the file servers, they see all the systems, and then they just go through in the middle of the night, for example, and just encrypt everything. And so you're left to either having to restore from backups, or in some cases, some people will actually pay up the cryptocurrency ransom to get access to their files again. These types of things, we see this happening to mom and pop organizations, really small organizations. We see it happening to city governments. You may be aware of, there were some news articles, I think it was around last year or so, where just a swath of small city governments in Texas got hit by ransomware attacks. And so these kinds of things, especially if someone, by the way, is a domain admin, as an Active Directory domain admin, they can go and essentially just crater every domain joined system overnight. And we actually saw that, not to pick on them, but the municipal train and bus system here in San Francisco one day had to just essentially open the turnstiles and let everybody in because every single system within their network got hit by ransomware attacks. And actually, I remember that day. I was like, oh, why are the turnstiles open? I look in the booth and I can see on the computer screen in the booth, it says, you've been ransomwared. And so I figured out exactly what was going on. But in any case, that's the types of thing that can happen to almost anybody. And it does happen to even small organizations. Device theft has always been an issue, but the sophistication in which thieves go after devices now is actually, I don't want to call it impressive, but it's sophisticated. One example is that thieves have started to realize that most people are not stupid enough to just leave their laptop in the back of a car. At least, I don't know the situation in Omaha, but that's something you don't do in California. Your window will get broken and someone will steal the laptop. So, smart people would put their laptops in the trunks of their cars. Well, a lot of times laptops have this feature in which Bluetooth is essentially activated, and there's a range in which you can sense that signal, even if the laptop is off. For example, Bluetooth can be activated to essentially as a switch to turn the laptop on, and so these thieves will walk along with these Bluetooth detectors, and once they find a trunk of a car that they can sense has a laptop in it, they break the window, pop the trunk, take out the laptop, and go on their way. So so the sophistication of these attacks, that's just one example. But of course, once stolen, if you don't have encryption on it, you could be in really big trouble. There's a lot of industry guidelines around if there's private information that was on that machine, that you have to then announce to everybody. You have to pay for their credit monitoring services. There's a whole list of implications of when devices get stolen. You may think, for example, you may trust everybody within your organization and say, you know what, I'm not worried about IP theft. I'm not worried about this and that. But the reality is that when they actually look at the statistic, somewhere around 90% of all of the information that's lost, that's accidentally sent out there is all done through what's called oversharing, or essentially accidentally sharing something with someone that you didn't intend to share that with. And this can be as simple as you sending an email that has a link that says, here's a document that we're working on. You put a bunch of people on it. That gets forwarded off to the wrong people. They click on the link. If there's no security around that, a lot of times there aren't. You can create these links that that you don't need to log in to be able to see. Or someone puts something in a cloud, like a database in the cloud, and they don't put the proper security on it. All of a sudden, it's just open to the entire internet. And that's actually happened quite a bit. I think the most recent case I can think of is the California DMV had shared something with a partner, and that partner put it in a cloud database, and so all of a sudden a bunch of people's personal information was out there. Obviously, that's something you want to avoid, but you've got to have tools and processes in place to be able to detect if something like that is taking place. While all this is going on, we're actually, as in IT, it's shocking to me how bad we are at password practices. Our password practices really haven't changed much since the late 90s. And a lot of that is because the tools that we have are really not necessarily that sophisticated and are not that good in modern password management. And for example, one of the things that may surprise you is that it's actually less secure to force someone to change their password all the time. The reason for that is that when you're forcing them to change it every month, or even 3 months, or even 6 months in some cases, they forget what that password is. They write it on a sticky note. They put it underneath their keyboard. You guys all know somebody who does that. They lift up the keyboard. They look. Oh, there's my password. Or they have it worse off sitting on their monitor. Or what they do is they take a relatively simple password, and every time they have to change it, they just sequence a number at the end of it. And that's the way that they remember things. But that leads to insecure passwords because you're constantly forcing them to change it. They don't want to have to call up IT and do the walk of shame to reset their password. And so they set it to some terrible or a really small password or something that's easily cracked. At the same time, you have to understand what hackers have at their disposal. There's a dark web database that currently contains 746 million cracked passwords. And those dark web databases have basically every password hack that you've ever read about, and then some, and they're all stored in there. And so all the bad passwords, or even all the good passwords in some cases that have been hacked because someone got a hold of the hash, or they did bad password management at whatever place that had their databases stolen, those are all then stored there, and they're immediately used in dictionary attacks. So So if I can get access and attempt to hack somebody's password, I'll immediately start with the 744 million as part of a dictionary attack. And then I'll try to brute force. Brute force, of course, takes a lot longer depending on how long your password is. But you can, there's actually what we would call white hat hacker sites like haveitbeenpwned.com, where you can plug in your email address and see if your email address was associated with a hack. And you can also plug in a password. I actually recommend, if you have an older password, plug it in there just to see if it was part of a hack at some point. Because, and by the way, I do trust the site, so you can actually plug in your actual password or plug in a password you intend to use. They're not harvesting passwords, but be cautious, of course, doing that on other sites. But in any case, that will tell you if that password is going to be used as part of a dictionary attack. If it shows up anywhere, you really don't want to use it. This is, incidentally, you may have seen this before. It may have happened to you. It may have happened to someone that you know, where you get an email from a scammer that says, I know your password and here's your password, right? They get that from these dark web databases. There's a password dump that's out there. And one very common, let me give you a common scenario that happens all the time within organizations today. Let's pick on a user called Bob. So Bob comes in, he knows not to use his Facebook password for his corporate password, hopefully, but he goes and he sets a corporate password. And as part of his work, they have him log into some cloud-based service, and he needs to create an account on that service, but it's not integrated with his Active Directory, so he needs to create a username and a password. Well, it's part of his job. Bob just creates his username at bob@companyabc.com, the same login that he has for his internal organization, and he uses the same password as his corporate password because he figures this is part of his job. That cloud-based provider gets hacked. Those passwords and email addresses get put into dark web databases. Immediately, what the hackers try to do from hour one is they then go to try to log in as Bob into cloud-based services. Maybe Bob's using Office 365. All of a sudden, they have Bob's username and password. They can log in very, very easily. This is one of the most common risks. And when you see someone whose password has been compromised, a lot of the times it's due to something like that, where their password just ended up in a dark web database. So the other thing, by the way, is humans are very bad at remembering the type of passwords that we tell them to create. They're very bad at remembering these long sequences of just random numbers and characters. They are very good at remembering long sequences of words, which incidentally are actually very good if they're globally unique, of course, because it takes an incredible amount of time to try to brute force attack something. That's called a passphrase, incidentally. So I give an example here: yellow birdseed hat pumpkin. The reason why it's relatively easy to remember that is I can think to myself a little mnemonic in my head. I can think of some yellow birdseed on top of a hat, or wearing it with a hat, and there's a pumpkin sitting there. I can remember that, and I can type that in as my password. It takes me a little bit longer, but it's a lot more secure. And again, ideally, I'm not changing it as often because, like I said earlier, that leads to issues. Cache credentials is a major issue as well. Cache credentials is one of the primary way that if you ever have a company do a penetration test, that's how they end up cracking and getting into your organization. And cache credentials is basically when someone logs into, let's say, a laptop, it puts a cached copy of their password on that machine so that they can log in offline mode later on. Where this creates a serious problem, let me give you a scenario in which, a common scenario in which this becomes a serious issue. User Bob again. Bob has very little rights on his machine, but maybe has local admin rights to his workstation. Nobody cares because it's just Bob's machine. But Bob brings his machine to the help desk to fix his printer. The person there needs to log in. It's an admin account. They log in, they fix the printer, they give Bob his laptop back. Bob then clicks on a link because Bob's not very smart and downloads some malware onto that machine. Now somebody who's running as a local admin on that machine has access to the cache credentials on that machine and immediately starts to do a dictionary attack against what's called the LSASS password store, or also a brute force attack. So if they don't get the password in the dictionary, they start a brute force attack. And unless that admin's password is very long and cryptic, they then very easily decrypt that password. And now they have an admin's credentials, not Bob's credentials. And as they would say in England, now Bob's your uncle. You go out and ransomware attack everything on the network, and that IT admin loses his or her job. So cache credentials is a major issue, and it's something to consider putting in guards against that. There's things you can do in Active Directory, for example, to not cache specific types of admin accounts, not cache their credentials. Lateral attacks, I kind of alluded to this, but essentially most of the time that hackers, when they really want to get at the good stuff, they don't just start with someone like Bob. They see what Bob has access to, and then they move from Bob over to, let's say, that other admin. And maybe that admin wasn't a domain admin, but that admin logged into systems that a domain admin had some cache credentials on. They then moved over to that system. Now they have the domain admin. So they move from system to system. And in fact, that's essentially what happened in the Sony Pictures hack. Is they were in the organization for weeks before they unleashed all the payloads and then essentially just burnt the IT to the ground. But one example is there's this thing called a golden ticket attack. When someone is able to gain domain admin access, instead of immediately leveling things, they do things like create these Kerberos tickets that never expire. And then that way, if suddenly they lose control, someone resets the password of that account, they still have access to these golden tickets that can be used to do domain admin level activities on the organization. So lateral attacks is a major issue as well too. So hopefully I've scared you a little bit, but there are things that you can do, and there are some tools which we'll take a look at towards the end here that we can do to protect your intellectual property from theft. And one of the first ones is just to kind of get yourself in the way of designing your information technology infrastructure around what's called defense in depth. And so this means that if someone is able to get through one layer, there's another layer of things that they have to get through. So, for example, if they're able to get your username and password, then you have, let's say, multi-factor authentication in place. Or if they're able to steal your laptop, then they can go ahead and if they have that machine, maybe you've got some certificate-based wireless, where they have to have a specific certificate to even get on the network, for example. So defense in depth concepts, design around that. Focus on all of those layers of the model, the physical, the network, the host, the application administration, and the data layer. I talked a bit about password best practices. As mentioned before, use your passphrases. As weird as it sounds, and if you're not in charge of this decision, maybe just talk to people who are in charge of this decision, but it's really not effective to have people change their passwords that often. I do recommend, at most once every 6 months. And I know, certain people in security think to themselves, well, no, that's wrong. But if you think through why that is, it's really not effective, and it leads to bad password management. At the same time, if you do have access to a password management tool, that will help you. I use password management tools personally and professionally. I've used them at different organizations I've been working with. And they help me to make sure that I'm not reusing any passwords, and that's really key. That's something, for example, when I'm talking to, even when I talk to my daughter about her social media accounts, and make sure she's got unique passwords across each one of them. She's not reusing them. She's actually using a password manager as well as using MFA, because kids hack other kids all the time now. They log in and then they cause mischief and trouble. So. Hyperlink safety. This is kind of an important one. If you ever get a link, inspect that link before you click on it. Now, it's a little harder on mobile devices. You can there's ways that you can do it on mobile devices, but at least on a computer, you can hover over and you can see. And I actually did a screenshot of a real, I get these scam stuff all the time. And you can see this one is there's no way that this is JP Morgan Chase Bank. This is sending me off to some weird domain somewhere off on the internet. So surprisingly, people still fall for this stuff all the time. I've gotten to the point where I actually very rarely, very, very rarely, unless I know or I'm expecting to click on a link in an email, if I get something from Amazon or from my bank and I believe that it's real, I just go in and pull up a browser, pull up the bank website and log in that way. And if they're not telling me something there, I know that it's fake within my email. So I've mostly gotten to the point where I just essentially ignore any hyperlinks in any emails nowadays. And so it's something to keep in mind is, that is one vector in which they come at you hard, is through those infected hyperlinks. When you click on those links, incidentally, they'll give you a very convincing sign-in screen that looks very much like the sign-in screen that you would expect with, let's say, Office 365 or with whatever it is that they're, or with JP Morgan Chase. Used to be really like you'd click on those and they were very rudimentary sites, but they've gotten sophisticated. And there's actually the hacker tools that are out there are really quite professional. One time, to give you an anecdote, I had one client where they were concerned because somebody higher in the organization had received an email like this, and when, I went through, I created I've got access to isolated machines to be able to test this stuff. So I went through to check to see if it was real or not. And it was funny because I got a page that basically said, you haven't paid yet for your hacking tools. So you have to pay by sending, cryptocurrency to this address or something. So the hacker had set everything up, had gone through all this effort of setting up a domain or whatever, but hadn't gotten to the point of setting up the hacking or paying for the hacking tool to be able to launch that username and password dialog box. So, but when you do see them again, they get very sophisticated. They're very good at the way that they do this. Physical security. This varies by organizations, but tailgating has always been an issue. And what's interesting is if you go to some of the highest security clients, even a few decades ago, I had clients that would use what they called man traps, where they would only allow one person in at a time, and then that person has to show ID and stuff. It's gotten a little bit better. They have these kind of like subway turnstile type entry systems that people just, as they walk ahead, it can sense how many people are moving, and people scan their badges as they move along through those turnstiles. And if more than one person goes with just one badge, there's a little thing that pops down, or it sets off an alarm or something like that. So those stop people from tailgating essentially. At the same time, another thing people do that's surprising is one of the ways, I talk about penetration tests. One of the classic techniques that the pen tests do after they tailgate into your organization is they go drop infected thumb drives all around the place. And people will go, oh, wow, free thumb drive. And they plug it into their machine, and that launches a payload, for example. So don't just go grabbing thumb drives. If you don't know where it came from, it's very possibly a possible attack. And at the same time, also, if you do have wireless, highly consider, for example, that everybody, even your employees, have to then go through VPN after they've connected to the wireless. So essentially, you've isolated everybody on the outside, as opposed to the older concept where there was a guest network and then there was an employees network, and the employees network were directly on the network once they got in. There's a lot of ways of spoofing things that aren't certificate based. So spoofing and gathering things like web keys and stuff. So there's ways that people can sit there in a parking lot and sniff out your wireless and try to find potential vulnerabilities in your system. Full disk encryption. This is a must for pretty much any device that's out there. So make sure your mobile device supports full disk encryption, but also, of course, if you're using laptops, make sure that they're doing full disk encryption, things like BitLocker, for example, and that it forces them to use either a PIN or some form of biometrics to unlock their devices. And make sure you've got a mobile device management platform that can remotely wipe systems that have been compromised or that have done too many failed login attempts. DLP, data loss prevention. These are technologies that allow you to restrict what happens after the data has been accessed. So, we're very good in controlling the ACLs and around, this person has access, Bob has access to this, but he doesn't have access to this. But we're very bad then at once, Bob accesses that document at controlling what Bob does to that. Bob can go print it out. Maybe it's a confidential document, but he prints it out on the printer, or he saves it as a new version of a document, or he accidentally shares it outside of the organization. But different DLP technologies can do things like restrict, copy paste functions, restrict printing, restrict saving as, or even programmatically accessing things. So implementing DLP policies, those are highly useful for avoiding intellectual property theft. But the number one thing, and hopefully if there's one thing you get out of this, and there's one thing you do immediately after this conversation, turn on multi-factor authentication for all of your users as soon as you possibly can. Plan for it, put a project in place to do it, whatever it needs to do. If you played around with early versions of it and you couldn't get it working properly because Office wasn't working well, I can tell you it is much better than it was in the early iterations of this. And having MFA in place is your best tool for preventing a lot of the things that we talked about, preventing the spear phishing, preventing ransomware, because it makes it that much more difficult for the end users to get in. You know, if you've stolen the username and password, you can't get in because there's still MFA on that account. So that creates an incredible level of effectiveness at stopping organizations from having their user accounts compromised. I'll give you an example. There was one organization where prior to putting MFA in place, they would have account compromise. Probably, you know, it would happen quite often. Let's say after the fact, there were no account compromises. I think for 2 years after that, after MFA was put into place. So it drastically changes it. I think Microsoft said something like 99% less attacks effectiveness. The one, by the way, there are various levels of MFA that you can put into place. You're probably familiar with SMS text. SMS text is definitely better than no MFA at all. However, it's also the least secure of all the different MFAs. And the reason for that is that it's unfortunately way too simple for someone to do something called a SIM swap. And what a SIM swap is that I call up AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon, and I say, hi, I'm user Bob, even though I'm not, I'm the hacker. But I need to switch my phone over to a new SIM. Can you help me? And 9 times out of 10, they help him. And immediately they get it switched over. Now we have Bob's username and password and the SMS text for MFA, and we're now in as Bob. So SMS, that SIM swapping, that does happen, which is why it's better to use something like biometrics, or to use, if you have a mobile phone, one of the things I use, for example, is different authenticator apps. So that's like the Microsoft Authenticator, the Google Authenticator apps. Those allow you to have an app-based approach as opposed to the SMS text. So even if someone does SIM swap you, you don't lose that. The most secure, though, is a hardware key-based approach where you actually have a physical hardware key that you, for example, plug into your laptop. It has a certificate, and there's a PIN that's involved. Those are the kind of the next level. Those are what companies like Microsoft use. All of their employees use hardware-based keys to log into the network. All right, so we talked about different ways that you can approach this. I want to take a look specifically at some of the Microsoft tools that can help you with this. These are a lot of these modern tools that that I've been working with personally, and they're highly sophisticated and actually very useful for preventing a lot of the types of attacks that we talked about. Now, what I did with this particular slide is I kind of organized the tools in the area in which they best fit in what's called the National Institute of Security and Technology's cybersecurity framework. So that's, for example, identifying who someone is on your network, protecting your network, detecting when there's an intrusion, responding to that intrusion, and then recovering. So there's these various levels. And again, I'm just kind of throwing these different tools in here. Microsoft changes the names on these all the time, so I try to keep these up to date. However, it's I even noticing right now, Intune, for example, has changed to Microsoft Endpoint Manager, so that should be MEM. But just bear in mind, a lot of these have actually changed the names, even relatively recently, even about a month ago. They went through a big name change that they announced on a lot of these different tools. But we'll go through and talk about them, starting with one of my favorite tools. This is something called Cloud App Security. I use this on a regular basis. This is a phenomenal tool, and we'll briefly take a look at a demo environment using MCAS, which is the acronym for this. This is a tool that allows you to identify threats in between cloud platforms and be able to tell you, for example, hey, we noticed that Dropbox, not to say this happened to them, but let's say they had some kind of a hack. Dropbox had a hack. Here's all of the 50 users that you have that have been using Dropbox. You can go through and have them, you can block their account, have them reset their credentials, reach out to them and tell them, to reset their credentials. You can see when people are uploading large amounts of data. You can see, oh, someone just uploaded from SharePoint. They took 300 gigs out of SharePoint and uploaded it to Dropbox. And, that's not good because we don't support that, or we support something else. So this cloud access security broker, as they call it, is a really, really fantastic tool for being able to see what's going on across your organization. Microsoft 365 Defender is kind of a bucket of tools that Microsoft has, including Defender for Endpoint, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail here, Defender for Office 365, and then Defender for Entity, which I also have another slide on. So, but this again, it gives you an idea. They've kind of packaged these different tools into one overall center within Office 365, and then package them as what they call Microsoft 365 Defender. There's also an Azure Defender, not to get confused, because of course Microsoft is good at this, at creating confusion among all these different names. But the Azure Defender is based on Azure workloads. So if you have Azure workloads like SQL Server or IoT or different servers running within Azure, there's basically this Azure Defender suite that runs different agents that will tell you if somebody's trying to do a SQL injection attack against your Azure SQL instance, for example. MDI, Microsoft Defender for Identity. This used to be called, by the way, Azure ATP. So it got renamed recently. This is a phenomenal tool, by the way. It operates by sensors that are installed on domain controllers. And those sensors look for nefarious activity. They look for things like golden ticket attacks. Or they look for someone doing suspicious LDAP queries, like looking for all of the members of the domain admins group, which, you know, is something that might be a little bit suspicious. And then it sends those alerts up into the cloud console that you have. That cloud console is actually integrated now with MCAS. So you can see everything in one space. You can see your cloud-based alerts, and then you can see your on-prem alerts that come from MDI itself. Now, you need to have sensors on all your domain controllers for this to work properly. Otherwise, you have different blind spots. But it's a great tool for being able to see kind of what's going on internally within your domain itself and to look for different attack vectors. Azure Sentinel is a phenomenally good SIEM, which is called a security information and event management platform. And it's been built on top of something called Azure Monitor, if you've ever used that before. But essentially, what a SIEM is that it's a location to store all of your security logs. So you send all your security logs from your firewall, from all your domain controllers, from your file servers that have your audit events, and you store them in one location. And then it allows you to have different heuristics on top of it that look for attacks that may be occurring based on log activity. To look for you can see who changed files or deleted files on a file server. You can do audit searches against that, and you can store all that for up to 2 years or even longer if you set up a process to archive those off. It's for the clients that we've had that use this. This has been kind of a really, really useful tool for getting a look at everything going on within their security environment, to look at where the attacks are coming from. You can see that map that's there. When you see actually a real one, this is just a sample one, it gets a really good heat map of where all the attacks are coming from around the world, because of course there's constantly attacks hitting firewalls, for example. And give you another example of how important this is. You may be aware of that exchange hack, that very prominent exchange hack that took place, where where basically an OWA site that was out, any OWA site out on the internet, you could gain access to that Exchange server without even logging in as a user. And 4 days before Microsoft even came out with the patch for this, it was starting to get exploited. Well, the great thing about having something like Sentinel in place is they actually immediately released with the patches these sequences of these detection tools for Sentinel that would go back and look at all of your old logs to see if there was any type of activity that was associated with those attacks. So you could get peace of mind knowing that, oh no, we didn't get attacked. Or you could see, oh no, we were attacked. We need to immediately shut things down and start to sniff around and see where the hackers may have gotten into. So that's really, a couple of clients where we put this in, it immediately proved its weight in gold, I guess you could say, by having something like this in place. So if you don't already have a SIEM, some people are using other SIEM products, I do recommend take a look at Azure Sentinel. I talked about the password issues. Microsoft actually has a very good tool now that'll help you to put different policies in place around your passwords. So to stop people from using passwords that are part of dark web databases, or stop them from using parts of their names in their passwords. And this is something called Azure AD Password Protection that operates. It runs on all your domain controllers, and it operates by basically extending the capabilities of your passwords that are in your domain and blocking people from doing the things that I talked about. Azure AD Entitlement Management is a area of focus within Azure that basically the way that it works is that you don't have a permanent global admin. You would instead have people that can be elevated to global admin or other type of roles within Azure, and they have to run through a process. So this is great for if you need to give someone rights in Azure for a short period of time, like a vendor. You need to give them targeted rights. You need to only give them rights to specific things, and you want to have an approval workflow where before they start work, they have to get approved before they elevate those rights. And there's a tool within entitlement management called PIM. If you're using Azure, I highly recommend PIM. PIM allows you to then be in a situation where you have very few permanent global admins. You still have a couple of what we call break glass accounts just in case PIM goes down, and that's happened actually a couple times, usually for a short period of time. But in any case, you want to have a backdoor just in case, with a password that's in a vault, secured, very long, etc. But otherwise, people on a regular basis, when they're doing their regular jobs, use things like PIM to elevate before they do things like become a security admin or become a global admin. There is an on-prem version of the same concept, a tool called Microsoft Identity Manager. This is a complex tool. It's not. I don't necessarily want to lose focus on talking too much on this, but I do want to focus a bit on, if you look at that diagram, you see that bastion forest, because I think that's going to be a concept that's going to be the de facto standard for security for most organizations in the future. And the way that it works is you have a separate forest that doesn't trust your corporate forest, but the corporate forest trusts it. So just a one-way trust. And that forest is where you have all your admin accounts. And those admin accounts are then members of domain admins within corporate. It allows you to have completely separate policies, allows you to harden the domain controllers, allows you to have the latest. You're not held back by application restrictions and whatever. But having a bastion environment is a great way to kind of really harden your domain level security. Azure Information Protection. This is a way of doing DLP within your Office 365 and your other Azure properties. So there's something called Azure RMS that restricts copying and pasting, printing, and the other types of things that I talked about. So this is related to that data loss prevention type of policies. Keep people from mass downloading amounts of data, and also putting, for example, if there's a keyword that matches something, it stops them from emailing it, or it integrates with Outlook. You can do a do not forward policy. So if there's something confidential, you send it to a bunch of people, but you put a do not forward policy, and their forward button gets grayed out in Outlook. They can't send it to somebody else. This slide here gives you an idea of the way that Microsoft licenses all of these tools that I talked about. Don't quote me on the numbers. These numbers change all the time, and they also change depending on who you are. But this was, at the time I looked this up a couple months ago, these are Microsoft list prices. What you can see is, of course, Microsoft is trying to push people into the best tier, the E5 tier, or the Azure AD Premium, Azure AD P2 licenses, because that's where all of the kind of the good stuff like MCAS, Cloud App Security, PIM, all of those are available in the later licenses, but you can still do some of these other things that I talked about with some of these other licenses. So I'll give you a link to download this at the end if you want to take a look, but this gives you a general idea of the way that Microsoft licenses these various tools. Okay, I am going to quickly show you Cloud App Security, and I want to leave at least maybe 8 to 10 minutes for questions, but this should give you a brief idea. This is Microsoft's Cloud App Security tool. It's decided to refresh my permissions here. This is a test environment that I created that you can see kind of different alerts. It's telling me, hey, we have an infrequent country. Funny enough, that's the US. It's infrequent because this is a test environment and very few people, but most of the time in production environments, you'd see this if somebody, let's say, logs in from Serbia and you don't have a presence in Serbia, it'll send you an alert, and maybe that could be a sign of someone potentially hacking or that person's credentials. You can see other types of alerts that we've got in here. There's some suspicious admin activity that took place. This admin ran some reset passwords on a bunch of different accounts. In this case, this was actually just the Microsoft bot setting up this test environment. But this, if this was a real environment, this would be highly suspicious, where they're updating tokens and resetting passwords. I can also then look and see the discovered apps that are out there. See who's utilizing these different apps. You'll see there's various apps. They have different reputation scores. If I sort by score, I can see Microsoft thinks a lot of, some of these are terrible. They have really, really poor scores, or they're, you can set alerts up if you have people using specific types of tools that you don't want them to be using, or you can actually take a look and see, for example, who's using particular tools. Let's actually sort by one of the tools that I think is in this environment here. So you see in OneDrive, we can actually see if I go into this, take a look at the actual tool, I'll see how many people are using it, how much traffic, what IP addresses are the top IP addresses, what's the top users of this. This is just one example. But I can take a look at, again, this isn't just Microsoft tools. There's something like 10,000 different applications in this app catalog. And then I can also take a look at different users, see what those users are doing. There's way too many Azure accounts in here, but let's take a look at, for example, like this one. We can take a look at Brian's accounts, see what it is that, take a look at their user page. Let's see if there's any useful information on Brian. I don't think this particular user hasn't done much, no alerts or activities, but there's a few other users in this demo. If I took a look at what it is that they're working on, let's see. I think let's select a few more here. Let's see if any activity shows up. All right, so you can see some other activities. Now I'm trying to track down what it is that this person's doing. I can see in this case, they're doing a bunch of things in Exchange, running some specific tasks. This will help me to identify, again, if there's some kind of a security risk or something along those lines. So you can get an, again, that's a brief idea of what it is that you can do with this particular tool. Oops, I went to the beginning of the slide again. Let me go to the end here from current slide. Well, that's annoying. Sorry, give me 1 second. PowerPoint's deciding to be very, okay, there we go. There it is. Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left for questions, but I've also included some links up there that might be useful, including SlideShare. If you look at the SlideShare one, I don't have this. I don't have it specifically for Omaha, but I did this last week for the Pune user group in India. So it's basically the exact same slide deck. So if you want to download this immediately, you can find that on slideshare.net. I also included a link to a couple. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have my travel blog that's up there called sharingtheglobe.com. I haven't updated it in 3-4 years, and I apologize about that. I just haven't had the time, but you can get an idea of some of the travel stories that I have. Again, that's kind of been a passion of mine. Been to 175 countries out of the 193 in the world. Of course, that's been on hold for the past year, but I do intend on getting to the remaining 18, hopefully within the next couple of years or so, and hopefully make it to your neck of the woods as well too. I hate to admit it, I think I've only driven through Omaha. I did go to Tulsa once, but hopefully that changes at some point in the near future. So I will open the floor up to questions.
Amber, did you have a question about RMS?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So you were talking about the RMS, and I was wondering if that only works for the Microsoft products or if it works for other products like PDFs as well.
So there is a, the last time I checked, and don't quote me on this, but the last time I checked, there was an add-on that allows it to work directly for PDFs. And I believe I remember Microsoft saying that they were going to make it native where you didn't need the add-on. So I haven't followed up on it. So I would say it's very possible that you don't need the add-on, but at least in the past when I had to do this, we did the add-on so that you can do PDFs, and I know it also worked for it would also work for like text files. There was the add-on allowed it to do for text files as well too. But follow up, check with Microsoft. Again, I know PDFs is a very common ask, and I believe that it might be natively built into it now, where you don't need the third-party add-on.
And I might have missed this at the beginning of the meeting because I jumped on a few minutes late. The licensing needed for these tools, is it E3, E5?
Yeah, let me go back to the licensing screen here. So for RMS itself, you can actually license RMS separately, or you can have it bundled together with, yeah, actually, I don't think I have RMS on this particular slide, but yes, it's available in E3 as well as, of course, E5. But I don't believe it's available in anything lower than an E3 unless you do it as an add-on.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Shy bunch today.
Yeah, that's fine. Totally understandable. No, yeah, no, I mean, if you do have additional questions, or if you just didn't want to talk about it right now, please contact me. LinkedIn is a pretty good way of getting in touch. So if you have a specific question, you can connect with me, send me a message on LinkedIn. I do, again, have my Twitter and things like that. I really haven't posted much on Twitter for the past couple of years. Twitter turned into a bit of a cesspool, in my opinion. But you can also contact me. I don't put it there for the bots, but I'm at my email address is michael@cco.com. So if you have any, I think we actually do have a couple clients in Omaha. Now that everything is kind of work from home, one of the things that's changed is it's allowed us to compete all over the world, really. Of course, it's brought competitors in from all over the place to our area as well too, but that's just the nature of a cloud-based industry, I guess. But in any case, if you do have any and you have any project-based work, contact me at michael@cco.com or sales@cco.com. We'll also get you in touch with the right person.
Thanks for the presentation today. It was great.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody's time. It's always great. And if you're watching this in video later and you need to connect as well too, please feel free to reach out. And again, I do hope to get back to doing in person, because I know those are definitely more engaging than this online stuff. It's been a year. I think I've done something like somewhere between 15 and 20 online events over the past year, and I'm ready to get the headset off and get back to a little bit more in-person events. So, but we'll get there. I've got some stuff, scheduled for later on this year, and hopefully, again, crossing fingers, it looks like things are going well with vaccine rollout and all have you. So yeah, again, hope to see you guys in person someday.
Sure thing. We usually have our what used to be SharePoint Saturday. Now it's Saturday for everything, and this would have been our 9th year. So we're gonna hopefully we can have it in person again, and then have you here to speak. So,
would be great. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah, I do need to make it back out to the area. It's been years, and like I said, I was in Tulsa. That was the last time. I went to I forget the name of the city, but it's where they have everything written in Cherokee on the signs. It's just outside of Tulsa, but I thought that was actually kind of neat, because I didn't even realize the history of that, and woefully unaware of like even that there was a Cherokee script that was created and all of this, and yeah, it was kind of fascinating to me. So, all right.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I will stop the recording, and we'll see you all next month. Remember, next meeting is May 6th. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Forms. Okay, goodbye. Thanks again, Michael.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.